Mr. Moran from Texas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. When I came to Congress last year or this year, I viewed our out-of-control spending as one of the greatest threats to our economic freedom. Our country's prosperity relies heavily on our ability to grow and innovate, which we can do when we have our fiscal house in order. But we have a bloated national debt of $33 trillion and growing. And it's not the fault of just one party, it's both. Consider these statistics from just the past few administrations. During the Obama administration, we added $8 trillion plus to our national debt, which at the time he took over was just south of $12 trillion. Then under President Trump, another $8 trillion was added to the national debt. And since then, President Biden has added approximately $3.5 trillion to the national debt. And now today we sit at close to $33 trillion in national debt. As a result of our fiscal mess, I introduced the principles-based balanced budget amendment, which is House Joint Resolution 80 earlier this year. We've been working closely with Americans for Prosperity on the language of this issue. And this constitutional amendment, which is written in a way that is meant to be flexible, comprehensible, meaningful, and frankly, able to be passed and to be ratified, will allow Congress to affirm the principles of maintaining a balanced budget without overriding any of the policymaking power. The core text of the amendment and the primary principle reads simply this way: expenditures and receipts shall be balanced, which may occur over more than 1 year. And in fact, the total text of this proposed amendment is just 2 paragraphs. It also allows for emergency spending with 2/3 approvals from both chambers, but it allows Congress to decide how to balance the budget, whether it's structural or biennial, and gives Congress flexibility to change the design of the implementing legislation. The BBA serves as a foundation for Congress to implement detailed legislation over time that meets the moment. Washington has racked up a pretty hefty bill over the past 20 years, and now families and businesses are experiencing the crippling inflation and soaring interest rates as a result. They balance their budgets. Why cannot we? Increased debt leads to decreased freedom. Regardless of the statutes that would underline this constitutional amendment that would put in place those things that need to happen to make it a reality, we cannot ignore this any further. Mr. Primo, you mentioned in your opening remarks that, quote, Congress is constitutionally incapable of tying its own hands. At present, I agree with you, but I'd like to change that with my proposed constitutional amendment. You testified before this committee in the past in favor of a balanced budget amendment in 2017. Do you think it's needed more now than it was then? And if so, why?
I go back and I look at my old testimony, and I was talking about the concerns I had then about the national debt, and then I look at where we are now, and if I was concerned then, I'm even more concerned now, and I just don't see a path forward for Congress to, again, act on its own to balance the budget or even come close to balance in the absence of some external constraints. One of the things we always hear is, oh, Congress can balance the budget anytime it wants. Well, empirically, we can look back in history and see that at least in the last few decades, that really doesn't happen anymore.
Without a constitutional balanced budget amendment, do you think Congress really will rein in spending the way it needs to and get its house in fiscal order?
Unfortunately, just looking at the track record of Congress on lots of other issues, it often will take a crisis before meaningful action occurs. And some people say, oh, crisis is a great opportunity for action, as the saying goes, but I actually think that's a really terrible time to make legislation and make decisions because you're under the gun.
In your opinion, how does the national debt pose a concern long-term for future generations of American taxpayers? And in terms of our daily lives, how's it going to impact us if we do not plot a new course and make this change now?
Well, as the national debt continues to grow, interest payments obviously are going to increase, especially if we continue to see a high interest rate environment. What that means is that a greater share of the government spending will be to paying interest on the debt, which of course means that less funds can be spent on other things that are important to Americans. In addition to that, eventually we're going to start to see an effect of the national debt and economic growth, and of course, low growth is a huge problem for societies because it means that we won't have the level of prosperity we could otherwise have as a country.
Many programs such as Medicare and Social Security are captivating a whole lot of our annual spending. Do you think that these important programs should be considered when we are balancing our budget each year?
I just don't see a way to not tackle the entire budget if the goal is to have long-term fiscal responsibility. I think the key, right, is to remember is that the claim is, well, we can't, you never can touch Medicare, you never can touch Social Security, but the math just doesn't work out if you don't consider how you're going to reform those programs. They need to be changed.
Dr. Primo, I appreciate your time and appreciate your perspective and agree that we need to tie the hands of Congress moving forward, plot a new course, get on a fiscally sane course to balance our budget over the next decade. Thank you for your time.